I'm going to shut my printer off or it's going to be chirping the whole time I'm trying to make this video. Hello, everybody. I feel like it's been a while. It's kind of been a while, right? It's been kind of a blur. So DvsM 1997 came out. I've been selling lots of copies. First and foremost, I just need to thank everyone for all the amazing support. If you bought one, if you shared a post I made, if you told some friends about it, whatever you did, even if you just were like liking my posts about it or something, it was great. And it helps so much. And it does make the slog of making a comic for years pay off in ways that aren't just monetary. When I did the first one, and I've said this in the other videos, like I didn't expect to really sell any. I expect to sell like a dozen or something, which would have been fine because that's not what it was all about. But I ended up selling a lot of DvsM 1975. When 1997 was getting close to done, you would think, if I was like a normal, well-balanced, healthy person, that might have made me think like, oh, well, you know, this is going to go well too. It did not. If anything, it had this weird reverse thing where it's like, well, everyone just bought 75 out of curiosity just to see like what Gary's been up to. What is this thing he made? And then they'll read it and imposter syndrome alert. They'll read it and they'll see like, oh, Gary's full of shit. He can't make a comic. And their curiosity is sated. So when 97 comes out, they're not buying that. I read 75, I get it, blah, blah, blah. Like, and so I was expecting, okay, this time I'll only sell like a dozen comics. It's hell being me. It's just torture. So what's on the agenda for this last making of 1997 video? As you probably saw, my Instagram posts or my Facebook posts or whatever, it is Q&A time. I set up SurveyMonkey and I solicited questions on Instagram. Anyone wanted to ask me anything about comics or me or whatever, and I would try to answer them in this last video. So let's go. By the way, all questions by default were anonymous. You actually had to explicitly say, like, this is my name, you can use my name before I'd include it. So most of these I'm not going to be using the names that were given. It's only if they said. So let's start. Okay, so Bree Jones had a few questions. Which character do you connect with most in the DvsM comics? That was an interesting question. And it's weirdly hard. I'm going to answer, but first, this is going to sound like I'm doing a cop-out, and I am initially, but I'll answer. Kind of all of them. I don't know if you can write a character that you don't relate to in some way. Like, all the characters are sort of me, or me at a certain time in my life, or me when I'm in a certain mood or thinking about a certain thing, or people I know or people I've encountered, which is, again, like, you know, it's a cliche, but I find it to be, at least in my case, absolutely true. All art is autobiographical, especially when you're writing fiction. I mean, I don't know if you can conceive of a character that you don't have some frame of reference of. And even if you're writing a character that is like the complete opposite of you, in a way that's still sort of you. Like it's a mirror, it's a inverse, it's a mirror image. So it's still informed by you. It's still derived from you. It's still kind of you in there. So all of them I can relate to. But right now, at this time of my life, actually I think Jenny in the newest one, DvsM 1997. For a lot of reasons. Part of it could be just that I'm a sucker for, you know, hard luck stories and lost causes. And Jenny is a little bit of both of those. But also, And without getting like super like therapy session about it, I think I relate to Jenny's sense of otherness. I think Jenny doesn't quite know where her home is, doesn't quite know where her tribe is. And I think she's at a weird sort of point in her life where she's trying to transition out of chapter one, but she's not really sure what chapter two is yet. And I find that all very relatable. Bree's next question: how did you design the characters? That is a fantastic question. It's a question, it's almost like it was planted. I swear to God it wasn't, but it's like Bree will tell you it wasn't. But it's very, very convenient for me because this is what segues into what's next for me. Feedback for DvsM 1975 and 1997 was very good for both. Things that came up time and time again when people would actually take the time to let me know what they liked about it. There were two things that came up over and over: dialogue and the characters. People really got into the characters, and they liked that they were fleshed out and interesting and seemed very plausible, seemed very relatable, seemed very real. I thought it might be fun and interesting for both fellow creators and fans to deep dive into some of the main characters from DvsM. And it would allow me to share a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that I couldn't really get into in this series. So my plan, I don't know with the schedule yet, but it'll be over the next few months. My plan is to do character-focused videos, deep dives. There'll be one video for each of three main characters: Young Man in Black from DvsM 1975, Old Man in Black from DvsM 1975, and then a deep dive on Jennifer Burke, aka the photographer, from DvsM 1997. The way I'm planning to structure them, the first part of each video will be more about creation, where the idea of them came from, all that kind of groundwork. And then it'll go into more lore stuff, backstory stuff, trivia about the characters. So all the little things that I knew about the character when I was writing and drawing them that informed me on like how would they behave in this situation, what kind of experiences have they had, where are they coming from, that's not necessarily spelled out. So again, a video for each character, deep dive on them, creation, and then backstory and lore. That's what's next. I'm excited to do it. I hope at least some of you will find that interesting. Okay, got some questions from Squatchy, Superfan Squatch. Would Sasquatch be a good weapon to use against the Marsbots? Yes, based on the rules of this universe I've set up, which are not clear to any readers yet, a Sasquatch, if it existed, would be highly effective against the Martians, but I refuse to explain why. Squatchy asks, what happened to Blake? I guess there are, I should throw up a warning here, DvsM 1975 spoilers here, if you've not read DvsM 1975. Blake, as you may or may not remember, is one of the two children that was rescued from the house in DvsM 1975. He also had a younger baby brother, Nathan. The official what became of Blake and Nathan, they were moved to foster care. Blake grew up understanding that his weird memories of the events of DvsM 1975 are the distorted and traumatized memories of a child that witnessed his stepfather kill his mother and then kill himself. This is what's been told to him by therapists and people like that as he's been growing up. And in time, he was very young at the time. In time, he just kind of barely remembers the events of that day anyway. And he's gone to live a sort of normal life. I think now he would probably be in his 50s, something like that. Nathan, his younger brother, was too young to remember any specifics of that day. He also was put in foster care. They were separated. They grew up independently. The only thing about Nathan was he experimented with hallucinogens when he was in his 20s. And he had a vivid vision of an old man standing over him, looking down on him, which is a foggy, fuzzy, hallucinogen-induced memory, or triggered memory, a flashback even, of events of DvsM 1975. But neither one of them became Men in Black. Neither one of them became like conspiracy theorists or anything, because they were very young. They just assumed, like, of course that's not what happened. That's just my weird memory I have because I saw a horrible thing. Oh, wait, Squatchy had one more. Will there be any aquatic dinos? I don't think so. Right now, anything is subject to change based on new classified files being leaked to me. But as of right now, all the dinosaurs and other extinct animals I've imagined in this are just conventional dinosaurs and pterosaurs, like pterodactyls and things, but nothing aquatic so far. Probably not. Will you bring back a clone of the handsome, naked, crazy guy from 1975? He was the best. Will King Kong or Godzilla make an appearance? No. No. DvsM takes place in our reality, the real world. So unless King Kong or Godzilla are on the TV in the background or in a movie theater behind us, like, no, they won't be there. Here's a merch question. I'm into snapback caps. Will you be selling merch soon? Yes, that is one of my goals. This is another what's next thing. One of my goals before the end of the year is to get merch set up. I'm playing with one place now. I'm trying to figure out things. Not caps specifically. It'd be like t-shirts and prints and things. But I'm interested in caps too, especially, as you can see, with the COVID hair. It's the only way I can sort of, like, it's been all baseball caps and beanies trying to keep it under control. So I will let you know. Stay tuned. I'm working on it. Who are your favorite comic artists and influences? Great question. I could name a million. I'm not going to. But to stay focused on the ones that I would point to as probably the most influential for the DvsM comics, it would be the big three would be Hal Foster, Al Williamson, and Wally Wood. Those are sort of my Mount Rushmore when it comes to at least the kind of art style I like and DvsM influences. They're kind of this old school pulpy black and white, or even pre-pulp. It was finely detailed black and white, a real emphasis on traditional methods, not a real emphasis on color, and a less stylized look than what we began to see like in the Silver Age of comics, where, you know, things really started to look sort of extreme. When you look back at some of the older stuff, the classic stuff, it's very straight and people look like people and things look like things, and like it's very realistic. And I liked that, especially for DvsM, again, because I always thought it was very important to sell this kind of extreme concept. I want to try and ground you in every other way I can. So I want the people to look like people, I want handcuffs to look like handcuffs, I want jails to look like jails, I want cars to look like cars. So then when a dinosaur walks into frame, my logic is it's easier for you to accept that because everything else looks real. And so if I then really spend extra time making the dinosaur look good, maybe you can suspend disbelief a little bit and kind of accept, oh, wow, that's what a dinosaur would look like. Does the Martian language in the comics actually mean anything? Yes, there's a logic to it, and if I look at it, I can tell you exactly what is being said in each one. It's not the most complicated system I came up with it. I found there's a font I've used since the very beginning that's sort of the Martian font for DvsM. I write whatever they're saying. That's the starting point, this kind of weird, sort of illegible font. And then I do like weird tweaks and twists and things to it. So it's not very clear what you're saying. I will never translate it though, and I will never subtitle it because I like that effect. I like that effect of reading something, knowing it means something, but not knowing what it is. I like that. It's as close as you can get in a comic to overhearing a foreign language being spoken. You know something's being said, but you're not privy to it. There's no subtitles. You don't know. I think that adds a little bit of creepiness to the aliens, just to know that they're talking about something, but you don't know what. So, yes, it means something. No, I'm not going to tell you what or how to read it. This is a great question. This is DvsM 1975 question. Are Ruben and George, aka the two men in black, seeing hallucinations or having memories when they inhale the gas? Good question. They are having memories. The way I've written the befuddler gas, that's the shorthand for these units that have the hallucinogenic gas, the aliens, it triggers completely vivid, convincing visual hallucinations. And the way I imagine it working is that it goes deep into your brain and finds emotionally significant memories from maybe all the way back to like your toddler years, maybe even infant years. Finds anything where there's a big emotional weight to it, good or bad. And I'll get more into this when we do the deep dive on the characters. But so, for example, young men in black, aka Ruben, when he's been dosed in the house, everything he's seeing is at least a funhouse mirror version of some significant memory that has some emotional weight for him. Remember, after he's dosed, the alien that's in the house appears kind of owlish to him. It looks like some sort of strange anthropomorphized owl. The reason it looks like an owl to him, there's two things happening there. One is just the alien's eyes. It's these big eyes, and like through his weird hallucinogenic trip, it just makes him think of an owl. But more so what it was, if you look closely, when they first go into the house and they see the two victims in the living room, there is a macrame owl on the wall just above one of the victims. And whether subconsciously he just registered that. And he's seeing this body, he then turns and sees another body. Filed in the back of his head is this weird owl hanging on the wall. Then he gets dosed, and what do you know? He's seeing owls. Like it's that kind of thing. Everything he sees has some backstory thing that I kind of figured out. This is why he's seeing it. Same with George. But we will get into that when we do the character videos. Great question, though. I really appreciate that one. What happened to Jenny? This was in all caps. I'm putting that back on you. What do you think happened to Jenny? I don't mean to be cute about this, but I'm not going to talk about what happened to Jenny. I have an idea what happened to Jenny, but I'm more interested in what you think happened to Jenny. For a variety of reasons. First of all, I think it's just fun to wonder and speculate and ideally debate a little bit. Like, what do you think became of her? There's all sorts of possibilities. Maybe she took the deal, but the comic seems to imply that she was never really seen again. So it must not have been as simple as the deal that was presented to her. Is she in some sort of witness protection thing? She living somewhere else under a different name? Did a sympathetic man in black type spring her and, let her slip across the border to Canada or Mexico or something and get away? Is she still sitting in a cell somewhere, like in a Guantanamo situation, just locked up forever? Did she commit suicide? Was she suicided? Like who? What do you think happened? What do you think happened? And why? If you go back a couple videos ago, I talk about what dinosaurs have in common with conspiracy theories, what have in common with burlesque fan dancers. It's about making you wonder, making like you not being able to complete the puzzle. There are pieces missing, and that excites your brain. You know, this is a conspiracy theory series of comics. There's going to be unanswered questions. I'm going to close some of the loops and as we get farther along, but some are always going to be open questions, and Jenny is probably one of them. I do want to make one little analogy, though. One of my favorite movies of all time is Pan's Labyrinth. If you've not seen Pan's Labyrinth, you want to skip this next part because it's a spoiler about the ending. You should go see Pan's Labyrinth. It's great. At the end of the movie, you see a sequence of events that are very ambiguous. There's a couple ways to read it. A little girl gets shot and dies, and one of two things happens. Either she is, in her death, transformed into a underworld princess, reunited with her family and now in royalty and living in peace and happiness forever. Or this little girl was shot, and as she bleeds to death, she has this fantastical vision as her last few thoughts of this happening. And I always thought it was kind of a good litmus test. Are you a pessimist or an optimist? To say, what do you think happened at the end of Pan's Labyrinth? Did that little girl die and hallucinate being a princess in a fantasy kingdom? Or did she die and become a princess in a fantasy kingdom? Maybe Jenny is sort of the same thing. What do you think happened? What do you think's a good ending for her? Part of the point of Jenny and this story, Jenny's story, is to present a sort of murky sense of what constitutes a win and a loss. What is a triumph and a failure? Maybe it's because I was raised Catholic, filled with stories of crosses and martyrs and all that stuff. But I do have sort of a complicated idea, like sometimes what looks like a loss to everyone else is actually a victory. If nothing else, a moral victory, a victory of principle. Even if ultimately, like just at first blush, this does not look like a win. I wanted Jenny's end to at least hint at that like she's not sprung. She didn't talk her way out of this. But at the same time, when Cynthia leaves that room, you kind of feel like Jenny won. Do you know what I mean? That's what at least I'm hoping you get. So in a way, whatever happens after that, it's fun to argue about. It's fun to speculate about. Does it matter? I don't know. Okay, did you go to art school? Is that important? I did not. I do not have a degree in art. I don't have a four-year degree in art. I have like an associate's in fine arts, hardly anything. I've taken a lot of college-level art courses throughout when I was at the university. I would just every semester, I had, like I said, I have an associate's in fine arts. I took lots of studio art classes. Once I graduated, every couple years I'd go back and take the odd art class just to stay, because I love them. I love studio art classes. I've taken ceramics, I've taken painting, I've taken life drawing a billion times, but I do not have like a formal program 4-year degree in art. Is it important? I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I didn't do it. But here's my take. And if you do have an art degree and you're watching this and you have any thoughts, please share them in the comments. Like I'd be interested, and I'm sure like people who ask questions like this would like to know. But here's my gut reaction. If it means going into debt to do it, no, I don't think it's worth it. There are certainly some things you're going to get out of a formal art education that will help you. Things that I feel like I missed out on. And I think it would help you to be around other artists, which is something that, and that's the last question I want to talk about. We'll touch on that again. I think it's important if you're serious about art to find a community of artists. And if you're in art school, well, it's just ready made. You probably will take for granted how you're just surrounded by creatives rather than accounting and secondary ed majors. That's going to help you a lot. And I don't mean in a material way. I don't mean like, oh, networking and it's going to get you jobs. No, I mean like moral support and feeling like you're not an alien and talking to people who understand what it's like to walk down this path. But I had a job where I worked at a company where we were hiring graphic designers. And I can tell you that education never made one bit of difference in any of my peers' evaluating of applicants. It doesn't matter. What matters is, what does their portfolio look like? And do they seem trainable? And is this someone you want to sit next to and work with? Those are the three things. Those are the most important things. If you have a decent portfolio, you seem like someone who can learn something if we try to train you, and you're not obnoxious or weird or rude or you don't smell, whatever, good enough. Art is one of those things, one of those increasingly few things, where if you can do it and you seem like somebody that people can work with, you can get hired. You don't need an impressive degree. Again, especially if it's going to put you in some kind of crazy debt for the next 20 years. Don't do it. You don't need it. With the resources available to you now that weren't available when I was in college, YouTube, online communities, etc., 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 you can educate yourself if you have to. You can sit and watch a million YouTube videos. You can get your hands on the software and practice, practice, practice. You can put together your own portfolio. You can do the work and learn and push yourself and try and get better and better. It might be a little bit more work than if you're actually going through formal instruction, but it's very doable. Related, do you have any advice on how to get art jobs? It's kind of the same thing. Work on your portfolio and build up your interview and job skills. If you seem like someone people would be okay working with and you have a decent portfolio, you should eventually be able to find jobs if you're persistent enough. There's you're going to get a lot of advice on this. I'm sure if you search on YouTube, you're going to find 8 million videos talking about it. My friend Dan Ikas talks a lot about how to get artwork. Here's one thing I would add that worked for me, and I don't see people use a lot, but I feel like it's a great way to go about it. Think of your art ability as a value add for any job, even if it's not an art job. I've always thought of my art skills as sort of like being bilingual or being able to touch type or anything like that. Just list it as a bullet point on your resume. Accomplished graphic designer, whatever, skilled illustrator. So, however you would describe your ability. And what you do is, wherever your job is, whatever you're doing, even if it's not art related at all, eventually you're going to see a window. Eventually they're going to need someone to come up with a new graphic for the website. They might have need of some illustrations for a training manual or something. Something will come up where they need something drawn or designed or something. And that's when you need to have the confidence to flag somebody down and say, like, let me have a shot at this. It's going to be a win-win thing. Like, they don't have to hire someone for a lot more money outside. And there's really no loss. All they would just say, like, hey, at the end of the week when I'm caught up on my work, let me work on this for a couple hours. I'll show you what it is. And if you like it, like, that'll save us a lot of trouble and money. Just work your way in. That's how I started. I had a job at a orthotic and prosthetic lab right out of college. And around that time, they were coming up with a training manual for the manufacturing process, like their little assembly line. And they thought it would be helpful to have visual aids. Like, this is what this should look like coming out of the oven. This is how something goes into the vise, etc. And I said, like, hey, I can draw that. I can draw that. And you do a couple to show them what it looks like. And hopefully, if your skill is good enough, they'll say, like, yeah, that'll work. And then you say like, well, it'll take me this much time. And I think when I did that, they carved out either Fridays or like a half day on Fridays, something like that, where if you catch up all your work during the week, you have Fridays to do illustrations for the manual. And that's how you start. And now you're off. Now you have a paid art gig you did. And it can, if you can just look for those opportunities and step up when you see them, you can start getting art gigs even if you don't have an art gig. Do you know what I mean? Like, that may not be your title, that may not be your job, but now you're developing that skill set and you have stuff you can put on a resume. That would be my advice. Great questions so far. I'm enjoying this. Okay, this question was kind of funny. Tell me more about the art of writing sounds. I noticed it a lot in 1997. It's sort of fascinating, maybe something that comes naturally if you read a lot of comics. So I enjoy writing onomatopoeias. That's the technical term. It's basically a word that sounds like the sound. It's two things. When possible, I try not to use the word that you always see. So like for guns, I'm not going to say bang. For, like I'm trying to come up with something new. The other thing I'm trying to do when possible, I guess there's three things now that I think about it. The other thing I'm trying to do when possible is get closer to what I think it sounds like than what I've seen in the past. Like, I was very proud of in DvsM 1975 when he's shifting gears in the Dodge, the like kerlunk and kerthunk. Like, to me that sounds a little bit what, it sounds like to put a car in gear, like a kerlunk. And I liked when he was rolling down the window, the scree, scree, scree. I think it was S-K-R-Y. Like, I thought that's what it sounds like. In 97, there was a sound where a big metal crate is being dragged across the desert floor. And I think I just did like RG, 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 like just kind of, like, I don't know what that sounds like, but that's the last point. It needs to be something that you don't have to really spend a lot of time reading. Like, really quickly you get the sound of it. I don't want to do a word for a sound that you have to kind of sound out carefully to even understand what's happening there. It needs to be very quick because it's a sound. Like, you're hearing it immediately. In a way, you have to come up with a word that's like that you very quickly get. It can't be like a, like, not that this would be an onomatopoeia, but it can't be like abracadabra, where it's all these weird things you have to read. It needs to be something where just by looking at it, you kind of get it. That's a fun question. What can you tell us about DvsM 3? And how many DvsM comics would there be? Do you already know what they're going to be about? We're going to start with the last one first. Yes, I do have outlines for all of them. In some recent videos, I think I've thrown out there that there are 6. That's not, I shouldn't have said 6. It's 6 or 7. It depends. The confusion is, I don't know if I'm going to try and combine the last 2. Because I'm not convinced the 7th can be a whole comic. So I might just tack it as sort of like the end of the 6th. So it'll be 6 or 7. And yes, I have at least a paragraph summary of every single one, which I had written years ago. Before I even began this whole crazy thing, I had just sort of like, this is going to be the whole story. This is what all the chapters are about. So I'm not going to, obviously I don't want to spoil anything, and you're going to have to wait to see what the 3rd one will be. But I'll tell you a little bit about the next 2 I have planned, because I'm sort of playing with writing both of them right now. To recap, the first one, DvsM 1975, was very Man in Black focused. Second one, DvsM 1997, that was going to be the eyewitness focused one. We're going to focus on a civilian, someone who's not a man in black, not a soldier, nobody, who just doesn't know anything, doesn't even know what the hell is going on, seeing the Dinosaur-Martian War accidentally and what their story is. So that's 97. What's next? The next one is most likely going to be DvsM 1979. This is where we start hopping around in the timeline. Without getting into spoilers, it's going to be scientist-focused. And then the 2 sort of themey things I'm looking for and creative ambitions, I want this one to be the shortest of all of them. This is going to be my challenge to myself, to write a very tight little story. And I also want this one to be the one that makes you cry. So it's kind of my model. It's not going to be anything like this, but my inspiration is going to be like the first 5 minutes of Up, the Pixar movie, of like, how do I tell a story very quickly that emotionally affects you? Like a little short one. So that's the goal for DvsM 1979. The next one, which is one actually I've done maybe more work on, because while I was finishing DvsM 1997, it generated a bunch of ideas for this next one. DvsM 2001. That one's going to be soldier focused. That one's going to be the sausage fest. It's going to be a bunch of, like a SEAL Team 6 kind of thing. Like it'll be like a very elite group of soldiers. And in terms of like what vibe am I going for, that's going to be the horror one. I want that one to be scary as F. I want that one to be like the really creepy one, without getting into why or how, but that's sort of the idea. I have 2 starting points for it. I'm deciding if I want to tell you my starting points. I don't. You'll just have to wait. You'll just have to wait and see. But again, soldier focused. That'll be my horror one. That'll be the one that's unsettling and creepy, nightmarish. Then the last 2 to 3, depending on how, like whether it's going to be 6 or 7, you'll have to wait and see. We're not going to talk about those yet. It's too far away. Okay, this is another good one. You list a lot of proofreaders in the credits for 1997. Do you have advice how to pick one? I have a few tips. This is just what I've done. There's probably better ways. I don't know. I'm new at this thing. First of all, I would say try to find people who are in your audience, your target audience. If there's a group of people that you think, like, these are the people who are going to buy my comic, ideally one of them would probably give you decent feedback. Not necessarily, but that's a starting point. For this one, for 97, I pulled in a lot of people who I would categorize as experts in things that I'm not an expert at. In this case, 97, I had, my 2 main characters were women, and as much as I've known women in my life, my mom was a woman, I've dated women, I'm not going to claim like, I understand women, I know what women are all about. I feel like I have a pretty good idea, but I'm not going to just go and say like, I don't need any advice or thoughts on this. So I thought I would like some women to read over my female characters and tell me if does any of this not ring true. Furthermore, Jenny is a recovering addict, and I don't have any personal experience with addiction. So I wanted to find some people who have had that experience and have them like, does this check out? Is this the kind of terminology Jenny would use? Does she behave correctly given like the backstory I've come up with for her? Like, fact check me on this. Does this ring true? Is this what an addict looks and sounds like at this sort of stage of her disease, the history she has? The last tip I would say for proofreading is, stay with me here. You want to find people who can appreciate what you're trying to do and help you get there, as opposed to give feedback that would make it more what they want from it. That's an important difference, okay? Amateur critics are very good at telling you what they think and how they would change it so they liked it better, okay? That's not necessarily useful or helpful to you. And in fact, it can kind of pull you off the path and into a forest you don't want to be in. You're trying to realize your vision. The best editors, the best proofreaders, see where you're going, like they get kind of what you're trying to do, and they give advice that helps you stay on the path, okay? Now, how do you find people who can do that? That's tricky. My kind of crude rule of thumb is if you know someone who can distinguish between their subjective taste and objective quality, you're probably going to get decent insights from them. What do I mean by that? I mean, for example, someone who can say, I love this movie. This is one of my favorite movies, but I know it's not very good. Like, I know it's kind of a bad movie. I just love it. Okay? Or vice versa. Like, I hated this movie. I'll never watch it again. It's just not what I look for in a movie, but I can recognize it's beautifully done or very effective. You need someone who can identify what something is trying to do. Another way to try and sniff out those people, ask them what their favorite movie is and why. Get them talking about it. Get them explaining it. Or their favorite book. Or their favorite comic. Or whatever. Either favorite album. Like anything. And see what the depth of their sensitivity to a creative work is. Feel out like what level they're thinking about it on. So if you're trying to find a proofreader and you ask them like, what's your favorite movie? And they say, Basic Instinct, man, Sharon Stone is so hot. I don't know if you're going to get great insights on a rough draft of your comic. Okay? Unless your comic is about some femme fatale who's stabbing people to death. Like, and there's lots of sex and nudity in it. I don't know if you're going to get great feedback. What you want to do is find someone who really can get into, like, what makes a movie work, what makes it not work, what do you like about it, what do you not like about it. Tell me your favorite part of this movie. That's another good one. Say, like, of this movie, like, what was your favorite part? If they say, like, when the building blew up, again, I don't think that's going to help you get where you're trying to go. But if they say, like, I really liked the interplay between, like, this character and this character. Like, there was one scene where they're talking and you got a glimpse of, like, what this character's all. That's good stuff. Someone who can think about something like that. That's a good proofreader. And then, of course, like, someone you trust, But, I mean, it's a trust exercise to show someone your work. Okay, this is the last question. I want to save this for last because, first of all, it's kind of heavy, and I want to say to whoever asked it, it was an anonymous one. I'm very flattered I'm impressed that you had the courage to ask it, and I'm flattered you wanted my take on it. It means a lot to me. So thank you very much for this question if this was yours. Do you have advice for someone who wants to be an artist but doesn't feel supported by their friends or family? And then there's a little frowny emoji. This really bummed me out. It makes me feel, I'm sorry you feel that way. I have a lot of thoughts about this. This is actually a question that's kind of close to my heart because anytime I have the opportunity to talk to a young artist, this touches into something that I feel like the conversation always goes toward, which is how to find support. I'm going to ramble about this a little bit because I think it's an important topic, and I think there's probably lots of people who might see this who also could benefit from your question. But if you want, like, the too long didn't read version, I would say you need to build a community so you feel supported. If your family and friends aren't providing that for you, then you need to actively put together a group of people who will provide that. So I would say join some online communities, good ones. I mean, vet them. There are some shitty ones out there, but find, like, a good one where you feel like it's got a good vibe and people seem supportive and you can get good feedback and you feel comfortable. Start watching videos on YouTube by creatives, where creatives are getting together for roundtables. I'm a big fan of the Artcasters. I think that's, it'll make you feel like start showing up when they're live. They're once a week. They send out an email saying they're going to go live. Show up in the chat. Introduce yourself. Talk to people. Like, start making some connections. Start participating. Ask questions in Artcasters. They're really good about looking at the comments and answering questions. It'll make you feel like you're part of something. Dan Ekus has dozens and dozens of great videos that will cheer you on and make you feel good about yourself and encourage you. Seek him out as well. It's hard right now with pandemic, but normally I would say my first answer, if it wasn't for COVID, would be sign up for an art class at a community college or something. It doesn't even matter what, just some class where you've, whatever one's interesting to you. But take a class where you have people you can meet and talk to. Some of my favorite memories of life drawing classes are sitting on the little art horse next to somebody else and bullshitting while you're drawing the model. It's great. You need that. Now for the more in-depth stuff. Oh boy. Look. I think it's important to diagnose the source of this discouragement, okay? The way I see it, there are two main kinds, two big families of discouragement. One comes from, as fucked up as it might feel, as discouraging as it might feel, it comes from a place of love. The other does not. And I think it's important to figure out which one you're dealing with. Let's talk about the love one first, because it might make you feel a little bit better about it. A lot of people, including a lot of artists, have bought into this whole starving artist thing, that if you choose that path, you've picked a really, really difficult, rocky road for yourself. A lot of people, when you go and tell them that you want to be an artist of some kind, they hear that as if you had just told them you want to play pro basketball or you want to be like a movie star or something like that. Like, that's how unrealistic and ridiculous it sounds to them. The truth of it is, being a working artist is far more achievable than most people realize. It's just a matter of what are you willing to do, okay? There's art everywhere. Someone has to design it. And believe me, if you really start looking into it, this is mean to say, but let's be real, there are a lot of extremely mediocre or worse artists out there making a living. There's room for you. If you want to make it, you can, and you're just dedicated and you're focused and you have your eyes on the prize, you can get a job in art. Don't worry about that. The problem is a lot of people don't realize that. They've been conditioned with the whole starving artist myth. And the reason they're discouraging you is because they've bought into that. And they care about you. No one wants to picture you having trouble coming up with rent. No one wants to picture you living with another person in a studio apartment. No one wants to picture you like struggling. No one wants to picture you without health insurance. If they love you, if they care about you. And so their discouragement, again, it's maybe not the most supportive, but it's coming from a place of concern and compassion and care, all right? If that's what's happening, if it's someone saying like, wouldn't it be great just to be an insurance salesman or something? Like, that's where they're trying to steer you because they're worried about like, how are you going to pay your bills? Where are you going to live? What are you going to do? Like, I don't understand. I think the appropriate response is to say, thank you. I appreciate your concern. I'll be fine. And to continue down the path you want to go down. Okay? And find that art community I talked about earlier. There's another form of discouragement. It doesn't come from a place of love. It actually is a really ugly kind that I have very little tolerance for. It comes from a couple different places, but I'll give you like the two biggest ones. One is, if you continue down this path, the life of a creative, okay, you're going to come across a lot of people who attempted what you're trying to do and turned back. They blinked. They lost their nerve. It didn't work out for them. They weren't good enough. Whatever happened. Some people just called it. They're like, I can't do this anymore. And they were done. Some people couldn't make it work for whatever reason. They weren't good enough. They didn't find the right openings. It just didn't work out. It's not going to work out for everybody. Now, that doesn't require any... There's no hate there. There's no derision there. Like, sometimes things don't work out. The problem is those people will sometimes metastasize into discouragers. People who want to say, it didn't work out for me, so it won't work out for you. And there is no reason to think that. There's no reason to think someone else's path is going to be the same as yours, that someone else's story is going to be the same as yours, that someone else's experience is going to be the same as yours. That's them projecting. Why are they doing that? I think it's because if you succeed where they failed, it's going to make that sting a little bit worse. If you persisted after they quit, they're going to realize after they've already missed their shot, after they gave up the path, that maybe if they had stuck with it, or maybe if they had worked harder, or maybe they had whatever, it could have worked out for them and it didn't. Or maybe if they were better, you know? That's a bitter pill for a lot of people to swallow. A lot of people don't want to be confronted with that. This idea that the reason it didn't work out for you is because you weren't good enough, or because you gave up, or because whatever, like there was some reason. So if you make it work, you kind of illustrate that to them. And I think there's a selfish desire to not be challenged in that way. And it would just be better to say like, no, 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 it didn't work out because it never works out for anybody. That you don't need any part of. Fuck those people. That's ridiculous. You got to tune that shit out. It's nonsense. I'm getting a little hot about this, but I have very low tolerance for that kind of stuff. People who discourage young artists, people who discourage and scare people who are trying to be brave and live an unconventional life when all of society is oriented towards you doing like very normal, predictable, rote things. Like that should be encouraged, not discouraged, okay? So that's one type. And the other type is, and this you see everywhere, not just with like, if you're trying to be a creative, you see it in any part of life. Some people, because they're children, no matter how old they are, if you do something, if you make a decision that's different from the decision they made or the path they chose, for some reason they hear that as critique, that is somehow an indictment of their choice. When it shouldn't. We should all be grown up and confident enough to say like, you're doing you, I'm doing me, we're finding our own way through this thing, life is hard, life is complicated, whatever feels right is probably the way you should navigate these choppy waters. It's this kind of weird defensive pushback against a life that's not the one they picked, thinking that's not the way they think, believing it's not the way they believe. That's another thing you need to just fully reject. I would encourage you to check out Joseph Campbell and find where he talks about, and he talks about it throughout his books, but especially in Hero with a Thousand Faces, rejecting what he calls rejecting the impersonal demands of society. Everyone around you is trying to get you to do a thing, trying to get you to live life a certain way. And it has nothing to do with you usually. Nothing to do with your wants, your dreams, your hopes, your abilities. It's just the way you're supposed to do it. You're going to hear that a lot. This is what you should do. Should. Always perk up your ears when you say like what you should do is like just start immediately get into skeptical mode. And the greatest source of those kinds of pressures and constraints are often friends and family. It's no coincidence that in a lot of stories, a lot of fairy tales, a lot of popular movies, popular books, the hero is some kind of orphan, or very quickly made an orphan by the plot. Like Harry Potter, Luke Skywalker. Bilbo's parents were irrelevant. Frodo's only real family was Bilbo, and he like takes off early in Lord of the Rings. It's because there's an intuitive recognition that family and friends can kind of lock you in place. Think about the scene in Star Wars where Luke goes home and finds that his surrogate parents were crisped up by stormtroopers. And he comes back. What does he say to Obi-Wan Kenobi?
I want to come with you to Alderaan. There's nothing for me here now. I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
Despite how that sounds, Luke's aunt and uncle weren't just keeping him in a place. They weren't just keeping him in Tatooine. They were keeping him in an identity. They were keeping him as a farmer. They were keeping him as a homebody. And once he didn't have that obligation, he was free to live an unconventional life. He was free to learn the Force. He was free to become a Jedi. I am not suggesting you find stormtroopers to deal with the unsupportive people in your life. But what I'm saying is, in real life, you have to do the less dramatic, less cinematic, less exciting work of learning how to let in the stuff that helps you and reject stuff that doesn't. And it's hard, and it never gets easier. It's never, this is the battle you're going to fight for as long as you're walking down the path. That will, what will make it easier, what will make you feel more supported is, again, surrounding yourself by people of like mind, of like feeling, of like belief. Surround yourself with creatives. Surround yourself with people who are encouraging and who are supportive. You don't have to cut the negative people out of your life if that's not possible, but you need to water that shit down. You need to have more people supporting and positive and encouraging than telling you, like, couldn't you just get a job at the help desk at Target? Like, you don't need that. That's not helpful to you. You're in a very fragile, delicate time right now. You're like a butterfly just crawled out of the cocoon. You're still very soft and vulnerable. You're just starting this path. You need people who will say, like, easy, easy. It's going to be fine. You can do it. Just take it one step at a time. You don't need people telling you no. Tune that stuff out. Thank you for the question. And I believe in you. And I'm excited for you. And I wish people had told me these things when I started. And I just want to welcome you to a larger community, a larger family around the world of creatives. We're happy to have you. And we're excited to see what you're going to do. I don't know what your thing is. I don't know if you write. I don't know if you paint. I don't know if you make music. I don't know if you do spoken word. I don't know if you do interpretive dance. Whatever your thing is, good for you. And I'm glad you're doing it. You're very brave, much more brave than a lot of the people who are trying to discourage you into doing something that's very safe. There is no happiness down that path. A sure way to live a very unhappy, unsatisfying life is to make decisions based on what will get other people excited. Don't do it. Don't do it. No good comes out of that. Nothing. Making decisions for people who don't even have skin in the game. They don't have to follow through with your decisions. They're not on the line. You are. Would you let people decide how to spend your money? Would you let people decide what you should be wearing? Then you certainly shouldn't let them decide what you want to do with your life. We only have so much time here. Not to wax philosophical, but some people will disagree. There's a good chance that this is it, buddy. This is it. There's nothing after this. This could be the whole thing. You have control to live whatever life you want, for your life to be whatever you want it to be. I think you should take it. I think you should make the things that feel right, make the decisions that feel right to you. I'm fully supportive. So, good luck. I hope to hear from you more. All right. Making of DvsM 1997 videos wrapped. I want to thank everyone for watching. I want to thank people for liking. I want to thank people for sharing. I want to thank people for buying comics or talking about comics, telling other people to buy comics. I want to thank the people who bought extra comics so they could give them to people to read. It's great. It's great. You're making me more confident in walking my path. Because like I said, it never gets easier. Never. There are always reasons to turn back. Always. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Election is a few days away. By the time this comes out, it might be even closer. Keep your head down. Who knows what's going to happen? Take care of each other. Take care of yourself. Thank you so much. Bye-bye for now.
No one was left who could remember how it had happened. How the world had fallen under darkness. At least no one who would do anything. No one who would oppose the robots. No one who would challenge their power. Or so Dr. Wiley believed. Above the dark streets of the city, Dr. Light lives in a rundown.